Kahente yujats, akskare wake ni I keha'ka, neoenjodu, watkunuwaradum danazawagwegu. These are, I'm just saying very simply in my own language, that I am Kahente and I am of the Bear Clan, and I bring you greetings from my people, the keha'ka or Mohawk people. As Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples sharing in this land that we call Turtle Island, we have been tasked with meeting head-on an important challenge put before us by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada that ended in 2015. The challenge requires us to work collectively as peoples of many different nations, races, and beliefs to change the foundation set by the forefathers of this country we call Kanata. That foundation was based on the misguided notion that the original inhabitants of this land, the Indigenous peoples, were inferior and needed to be civilized and assimilated into a belief and way of life that was foreign and completely disregarded our traditions, cultures, languages, and ways of being that have served us well for a millennia. The question that I've put forth for this TEDx series talk on the big questions is an answer to this challenge put to us by the TRC. Getting to the truth is hard, but getting to reconciliation will be harder. My question then is rooted firmly in the perspective that I come from, the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois worldview, and my question is, what does Haudenosaunee reconciliation look like? Before we begin to answer that question, we need to look at the idea of conciliation or reconciliation first. The word reconciliation contains the word conciliation. Simply, it is the act of bringing into harmony. Reconciliation then references the repair of a previously existing harmonious relationship, but this term has been problematic and prevented many Indigenous peoples from taking it up and accepting it as a point from which to start. Why is this? Because the pre-existing relationships between Indigenous peoples of this continent and the Europeans that came here was not a harmonious one. It was fraught with tension, bloodshed, ignorance of our ways, and ultimately the genocide of many of our peoples. So then we have to ask, where do we go from here? I propose that we step back outside of the term and move towards conciliation, that we look back at another perspective on conciliation that comes from the Haudenosaunee worldview, and I invite you to go on this journey with me as I explain what exactly that is. So who are we? The Haudenosaunee are a confederacy of 5 original nations, also known in the history books as the Iroquois, the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and keha'ka or Mohawk, nations united in peace and mutual protection, and this Hiawatha belt represents that unification. When the peacemaker brought the good tidings of peace and power and to these nations, he used the concept of the long house as a symbol of the political and spiritual union of the confederacy. The Gayana the great law of peace, identifies specific roles for each of the 5 nations sheltered within this symbolic long house. The keha'ka or Mohawks served as the keepers of the eastern door, the Senecas as the keepers of the western door, and the centrally placed Onondagas are part of the central fire. Each nation had its own hearth, which symbolized its own democratic government, while the rafters symbolized the laws of the League. In keeping with this central symbol, the Indigenous name for the Confederacy and its citizenry is Haudenosaunee, and the term simply means people of the long house. Our original territories were in the Mohawk Valley, as you see here, in New York State. The way our longhouse is structured also speaks to how we lived in the valley, in our homelands, with the Senecas in the west and the keha'ka in the east. The next map illustrates where we are today. Through colonization, our peoples have dispersed, and communities can be found throughout New York State, Quebec, and Ontario. I show this just to say we are still here. So there's a story that tells about the formation of our confederacy. The peacemaker's journey describes a young boy looking to nature to figure out how to bring these 5 warring nations together in peace, and he developed a ceremony called the Small Condolence, which serves as the foundation for how we are to maintain peace between us. These beads here represent the words of that important message and that important ceremony. One would say when a person is in distress, the tears blind his eyes so that he cannot see clearly. With these words, I wipe away the tears of your eyes from your eyes so that you may see clearly. One would say when a person is suffering a great loss or grieving, there is an obstruction in his ears and he cannot hear, and with these words, I clear away that obstruction so you may hear clearly. One would say when a person has suffered a great loss, his throat has stopped and he cannot speak, and with these words, I remove that obstruction so that you may speak freely. So when this ceremony was done for the very first time, those who suffered came back into balance. It is said they could see goodness and kindness again. So when we do this ceremony today, it is about bringing people together who will see each other clearly, listen with clarity, and speak with kindness. These are the foundations of living in peace and harmony. The peacemaker also developed the Gayinardekgowa, or Great Law of Peace, which is the Haudenosaunee governing constitution, based in ideas of peace and power and having a good mind. It encompasses the social, spiritual, and political aspects of our people. It is said when we took up this great peace, we buried our weapons of war under the great tree that is represented here. Power comes from people working together in peace with a good mind and for the betterment of their people as a collective. The good mind is about putting your individuality aside and making decisions with the goodness and the kindness and with the needs of the collective at the forefront of your mind. So this is what conciliation is about. In this, we have the important 7 generations philosophy as well, which is about true accountability. It means simply that any decision or action you take, you must consider the implications into the future on the next 7 generations, or as we say, the coming faces, those yet unborn. Imagine living your life with that kind of accountability. So if one were to read it, and then you can find it online, you will see the great laws, a body of what you'll call laws that outlines our cycle of ceremonies, it outlines the roles of our chiefs and clan mothers, and the use of the consensual decision-making process as the basis of our governance system. This is only but a small part, and I encourage you to take a look at it further. So in answer to the big question I posed today, what does Haudenosaunee reconciliation look like? I'm proposing that this flag, called the Unity Flag, represents Haudenosaunee conciliation. Let me explain. So many will have seen this flag during the Oka crisis of 1990. Many will associate it with the Warrior Society movement that came to prominence at that time. Many think the term warrior denotes violence, when what we saw during the 78-day standoff was violence inflicted upon a peaceful people at Onkwehonwe near Oka, Quebec, who were defending the land. Indigenous societies are rooted in the idea of women being at the center of this deep connection to Mother Earth. And so what we were doing was protecting her. Our ties go beyond this physical aspect, and our ceremonies are all about acknowledging our responsibilities to Mother Earth, as we call her. This standoff was about a desire to expand a golf course onto traditional burial grounds, and at that time, my people stood up and said no more. During that time, this flag was flown prominently and became the symbol of resistance to oppression. It continued to be used, and you will now see it flown at most major events throughout the world. In later years, it has been perceived negatively. Its true meaning has been overshadowed by association with the Warrior Society as being a negative symbol and a violence-oriented one. And so I propose that it is the physical manifestation of the Haudenosaunee idea of conciliation, as I brought forth through the illustration of the Gayinardekgowa. Gardinyuk Daje, or Louis Hall, was the creator of this flag, and he was born in Onkwehonwe in 1919, and he grew up in the Catholic faith. But there came a point when, and actually he learned to read and write, and he was very widely read. One day, though, he had a sort of an epiphany, an awakening, and he had a very inquisitive mind, and he began to question what he was being told. And he decided to move away from the church and towards our own tradition, the Gayinardekgowa, the Great Law. He was a prolific writer and artist and became very proficient with pen and ink, and read extensively about our history and the history of Canada and the United States and the history of our Haudenosaunee peoples. We are one of the most widely studied people in the world, so there's lots to read, of course. As he read and questioned things, he began to put his thoughts to paper, and here you can see some of his questioning in his art. He drew pictures about colonization's impacts on our people. And as a result, he began to share this with the young people of Kahnawake and other Haudenosaunee communities through the Native North American Indian Traveling College in the 1970s. And as Kahente questioned how he came to be, he's situated in small reservation communities throughout New York State, Ontario, and Quebec. He asked, what happened to our great Confederacy? So what these illustrations show is that questioning of the Gayunardagoa, the great law, and where it had gone. His awareness and questioning had an influence on the young people. So there was, in the 1970s, there was a group of young people who decided to establish a community, an independent community based on the great law. And they did this, and it was called Kahente in the Adirondack Mountains. There, Kahente continued to paint, and this is where he first came up with the idea for the flag. He actually, I was told recently, he made it into patches that he gave to the young children in celebration of birthdays. So what the flag represents is Kahente's answer to where the ideas of peace and power and the good mind come from. And I see this most particularly in this picture, where it represents the spreading of the great law, but it being stopped dead in its tracks. The movement of the message of peace based on having good mind ended with the colonization of our peoples. So what did he do? He decided to draw it out in a flag to bring our people up out of the history books and back into life. The elements of the flag are as follows: the warrior in profile, the hair, the single feather, the sun's rays, and the red background. But what do they mean? Very simply, the warrior in profile is meant to be a strong figure, much like in previous drawings we saw. It represents strength of character and is associated with our word for warrior, which is rodiskanragete, which means he carries the burden of peace. And this relates to the great law, and its function as a way to bring our people together in keeping with the peace is very difficult, as you know, so you need to have strength of character to do it. The flag you see on top is the original flag, and in the hair represented there indicates peacetime, whereas the flag below is with the scalp lock and was designed in the 1980s for the Kahnawake Warrior Society, who asked them to design it as they were dealing and where they felt they were at war with the Canadian government over the cigarette industry. The single feather relates very closely to our roles of our chiefs and clan mothers, whose job it was to keep an eye out for any calamity that might befall our people. This is represented by the eagle at the top of the great tree that you saw earlier. The eagle is also an important ceremonial function where when we burn tobacco, the smoke is said to travel upwards to our ancestors in the sky world. And the eagle is the bird that can fly the highest. So it has that ability to carry that message to our ancestors. Finally, the sun's rays are important in that they symbolize the great white roots of the tree of peace, spreading out in all directions for anyone who wanted to follow it back to take shelter under the tree of the long leaves. And the red background represents our blood, the blood of our living people, the strength of who we are as a people. It is about life. The unity flag then represents our common culture and our history as Indigenous peoples to those who fly it. It says we are still here. It represents our original instructions to protect Mother Earth and maintain peace and harmony between us. And when asked about it, Kahente said simply it meant unity and resistance. So in answer to the big question, what does Haudenosaunee reconciliation look like? It looks like this. This is my eldest daughter and my nieces in Standing Rock, North Dakota. They were there as part of the struggle to protect the waters. This unity flag then represents the very foundation of what I think the TRC was meant to communicate when they challenge us to take up reconciliation in this country. The great law of peace represented by this flag is conciliation in action. It is carried and used all over the world as a way to communicate the need for us to come together in peace and harmony to protect Mother Earth. And this is what the great law was about. It was meant to do the same thing. And that is what Haudenosaunee conciliation looks like. Nyawak'owa.